College in South Carolina. I was a professor at Columbia College for about 20 years, and then I decided to do something more interesting. So I became a high school history teacher, which I'm doing right now and having a great time doing that. And I'm also I've been doing this for a long time as well. And so doing We the People is one of the highlights of my year. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say. I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves.
I'm Sue Leeson, a senior justice on the Oregon Supreme Court. Great to see you again. I'm not surprised.
Hi, I'm Margot Lambert. I'm I don't know what I am. I'm a professor of history at the University of Cincinnati, Blue Ash College. My husband and I spent our honeymoon in San Francisco. That's how much we love the area. So,
yeah. I've been to, except for changing planes, I've been to San Francisco twice and was sick both times. And so I have seen very little of your fair city. But if you will introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon. We are Foothill High School's Unit 1 representing the state of California. My name is Timothy Kim.
My name is Rania Fateh.
My name is Varunavi Mohanraj.
And my name is Michael Hubbard. We would like to thank the judges, audience, and timekeeper, as well as introduce our coaches, Mr. Dedamore and Mr. McBride.
Outstanding. Well, let's get down to business here. Again, we're Unit 1. We're interested in the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system. We're asking question 2 today. The foundation for good government is the rule of law. John Adams once wrote, "Good government is an empire of laws." How, if at all, is the rule of law embedded in our founding documents? What challenges to the rule of law, if any, have we experienced in our history? In what ways, if any, has the rule of law been important in the preservation of a free society? If you're ready, please begin.
Rule of law is, in essence, the concept that no citizen nor institution is above the law. In politics, Aristotle argues that rule of law is superior to any ruling individual by being objective and lacking innate human flaws. In America's founding documents, such as the Constitution, state constitutions, and the 14th Amendment, there are 3 major ways rule of law is implemented: universal application of the law, holding leaders accountable, and inclusion of due process.
Universal application of the law is important to American government by ensuring that the law is applied to all citizens. Article 6 of the Constitution states that it is the supreme law of the land, giving it authority over federal and state laws. Additionally, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment prohibits laws abridging equal protection across the states.
Rule of law is also essential to holding leaders accountable. For example, Massachusetts' 1791 Constitution provides checks and balances within the branches of government to limit each other's power, such as allowing the legislative branch to override the governor's veto in Article 2 and impeachment in Article 8.
Finally, due process plays a crucial role in founding documents as a method of establishing rule of law. Amendments 5 and 6 establish due process in cases, and additionally, Article 3, Section 1 mandates juries in all criminal cases, ensuring each individual is facing equal treatment under the law. Ultimately, it's important to acknowledge that while these provisions don't always work as intended, they set a strong foundation for future precedent.
America has faced challenges to rule of law in 2 main ways: political corruption and racial discrepancies in the American justice system. We agree with Machiavelli's definition of political corruption in his 1531 Discourses on Livy, which he defines as a decline in virtue among political officials, or using power for illegitimate private gain without proper legal consequences. This can be seen throughout American history, from President Harding's Teapot Dome scandal, where his administration accepted bribes from private oil companies in violation of the Emoluments Clause in Article 2, Section 1, to Congresspeople engaging in insider trading in violation of the 2012 Stock Act without a single prosecution on its basis.
Additionally, subversion of rule of law is evident with racial discrepancies in the justice system. During the Jim Crow era, lynching was often never investigated or prosecuted, allowing some individuals to be above basic criminal code, such as with the 1955 case of Emmett Till. Additionally, a United States Sentencing Commission study in 2017 found that Black offenders continue to receive 19.1% longer sentences than white offenders for the same crime. Ultimately, these examples demonstrate how rule of law is often not applied on an equal basis, especially with differences in race.
Our unit defines a free society as one that protects the natural rights of all citizens and allows for participation in political processes. One way rule of law guarantees this is by creating uniform application of the law. This is demonstrated in the incorporation doctrine, which gradually applied portions of the Bill of Rights to state and local governments through the 14th Amendment. For example, Cantwell v. Connecticut in 1940 incorporated the religious freedom enshrined by the First Amendment, allowing minority voices to remain heard.
Additionally, the creation of an independent judiciary in Article 3 ensures the freedom of judges to determine cases without external influence and properly defend the Constitution. For example, in the 1974 case, U.S. v. Nixon, the separation of the judicial department from the executive led to an effective check on the president's capability to abuse their power.
However, strict adherence to law can have negative impacts on free society. Introduction of mandatory minimum sentencing and strict strike laws have led to mass incarceration within the United States. Therefore, we see that while rule of law is a good foundation for a free society, the laws themselves must be both fair and just in order to reach it. Thank you, and we are ready for your questions.
Thank you very much. You gave us a very good place to start. Let me begin with a fundamental question. Is there a conflict, perhaps even underlying conflict, between the American ideals of democracy and popular sovereignty and the rule of law?
No, I don't think that there is really much of a conflict when it comes to democracy and rule of law because of the different systems that we have in place in government. For example, we have a separation of powers and checks and balances in Articles 1 through 3 of the Constitution that make it very hard for a leader or president to really abuse their power because of what's put in place.
But
That being said,
let me throw in a sidebar in there. If we move beyond simply the abuse of power, but what comes to mind is that, for example, the civil rights laws were extraordinarily unpopular and were conceived as undemocratic, even though they were certainly supporting the rule of law. Would that be a case of conflict, and how could we, and if not, how can we think about that?
I definitely think it's a case of conflict, especially in the case of the Reconstruction Amendments from the 13th through 15th Amendments. It was a struggle of federalism. We see many of the southern states refused to listen to these amendments, and even were able to completely block them by enforcing literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and poll taxes. And as a result, I think the one detriment to rule of law working as it should intended in American society is the fact that we have such strong federalism in the American government currently.
And I would add to that one of the real things that federalism poses an imposition to rule of law is with citizens and their capability to get around laws. For example, a large proportion of high-value cars are registered in Minnesota because Minnesota has low taxes on cars, and so they're able to get around the taxes that they might usually have in like a state like California, and they're able to do this through companies that allow people to essentially hold some stake in that company and then register their car there.
So you guys have persuaded me that separation of powers, checks and balances helps to reinforce the rule of law by holding the various branches accountable. What about the initiative process in your state? How is that consistent with, or does that raise the challenge of the balance between rule of law and populism or popular democracy?
I think the issues with rule of law when it comes to democracy is with our leaders and how they are implementing this democracy. Because as John Dewey said in his 1916 Democracy and Education, democracy is the ideal form of human social life. So it is as important as rule of law is. However, they both need to work together in harmony in order for society to properly function.
But hang on, I asked you a very specific question. The initiative process in California, it has been used to have devastating consequences in your state and maybe doing some terrific stuff as well. But how do you reconcile that power of the people through the initiative process in your state with a respect for the rule of law?
I definitely think it's dangerous to rule of law because the initiative, referendum, and recall allows the people of California to easily remove the governor. And I think the founders also saw this as an issue because many anti-federalists protested to the notion of letting the people themselves lead the impeachment process. This is why in Article 2, Section 4, impeachment originates in the House and then the final vote is through the Senate. It's because of this lack of distrust towards the citizens. So as a result, I do think that the initiative protocol is somewhat challenges rule of law, but ultimately
Here,
comes down to
I'm going to keep
as-
pushing you on this. Initiative is not used to remove, that's recall. The initiative is a direct legislative process with no checks, no balances, no public hearings, no veto power. Subject basically to what people read, see, deal with in social media or television. Is that consistent with rule of law, or do you think your state needs to place limits on that initiative process?
I don't think our state needs to place limits on the initiative process. I think there's two examples that best put the sides of this that would look for each argument. I think one example is the initiative and the proposition that ended up in Article 1, Section 26 of the California Constitution, which was a response to how there was a lack of enforcement. And so Article 1, Section 26 requires that all state officials intend to enforce the law, which is a direct opposition to the 2006 case, Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, in which the Supreme Court decided that the Colorado's police department did not have a requirement to enforce the law. That being said, on the opposite side, we see things like the recent proposition to allow Uber and Lyft drivers to be given health benefits, in which the push by the corporations had a negative impact on the way that it was actually a true representation of people's voting and not just an issue of voter fatigue.
Additionally, the initiative process is only a proposal. It's only a proposal. It doesn't automatically make every proposition that is proposed a law. You can also see that the proposition process does have a check through the California Supreme Court. For example, Proposition 8, which was voted in originally, was later struck down by the California Supreme Court, and it basically just discriminated against LGBTQ people. And because it was unconstitutional, it was struck down.
That's an interesting point to that I want to go off. That is unconstitutional. The idea of unconstitutionality and who decides it. You guys talked about separation of powers, the importance of an independent judiciary, as Hamilton mentioned. But my question right now for you all is that the Supreme Court of the United States is far too powerful. Far too much power lies in the hands of 9 philosopher kings and queens. And what kind of checks do they have on them right now? For example, some people argue that Roe v. Wade in 1973 was a disaster, was a travesty, was not what the people wanted even then. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. What do you guys think? How do we reestablish that balance?
I think that in the specific case of Roe v. Wade, this is one example of how the Supreme Court can get around or move towards different ways that they should be doing this. I think that the right to medical rights shouldn't be under the veil of privacy. I think it should be under the veil of equal protections, and under like the idea that everyone should have equal access to medical health care under the 14th Amendment. I think that that being said, the Supreme Court's power is somewhat up to the respect of the people in society.
Additionally, to go back to your question on what checks do we have, the only feasible in paper check that we have is impeachment under Article 2, Section 4, which allows Supreme Court justices to be removed. But this has proven to be quite ineffective due to the fact that throughout the history of the United States, only one Supreme Court justice was ever removed, Justice Samuel Chase in 1803. And in addition, I guess another way to look at this is we do have a code of conduct. The 1973 Code of Conduct for United States judges prohibits family members of judges to have any political, economic, social, or cultural influences on the judges' jurisdictions. But one example which this can be proven to be ineffective is the fact what we see recently with Clarence Thomas, with the text messages with his wife about how his wife was promoting an insurrection during January 6th. So as a result, to go back to your question, we do have checks, but they're proven to be very ineffective.
So ultimately, I think that there should be more limitations and checks that are put in place for the Supreme Court, because it's obvious that this branch is not has a lot more power than the different branches.
And this is emphasized by Montesquieu in his 1748 Spirit of the Laws, where he really emphasizes checks and balances for every branch, including the Supreme Court. Although it's fairly removed from the other branches and acts on its own, it's important that we keep this in check, especially because it's such a fluctuating branch, depending on who has a seat. And because these seats aren't elected, it's important that other checks are put in place so that we truly represent a democracy.
We have just very little bit of time left, so let me ask you a quick question. At the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the things that must exist, universal applicability, accountability. Must all of these exist for us to say that the rule of law also exists, or can we pick and choose among those?
I think rule of law is a spectrum. I think that it's not necessarily that one has perfect. The World Justice Initiative ranks all countries. They have their rule of law index, and they rank all countries on a scale of 1 to 100 on their capability or their adherence to a rule of law as a foundation. But we see that even too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And so, too much strict adherence to law can be bad. And so we look at countries like Denmark, which the World Justice Initiative ranks as their top rule of law country. But even they have some issues. May I finish my thought?
Sure.
Even they have some issues with things like protections for people of different races or ethnicities.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Nice.
That was a strong conclusion to a very good discussion all the way around. You had an incredibly well-organized initial presentation. It followed the questions, and so it was very easy to outline your response. You responded to our questions well. I'm trying to check my notes here. You move very fast, and so you faster than I could write, which is not a bad thing. I really liked your discussion of the initiative process, and of course, recall, while different, is the same kind of problem raises for us. Yes, it's very democratic, but it can play havoc with the rule of law and sometimes with the will of the majority. So a great job, wonderful conversation, and I wish we could continue it for a good bit longer.
I concur absolutely with my colleague. You guys all performed magnificently well, especially when sometimes one or two of you were trying to get in on the conversation and couldn't quite get in, but then managed to, in the end, very smoothly and very well insert yourself in the conversation. I was very impressed, and you handled it with aplomb and good job. Your reasoning was very, very good. I especially loved the initiative discussion because it's so interesting in California, and how your overall knowledge of your own state constitution, which I think is important as well. And so I just have to say, overall, California Wild, you guys rock.
Wild California you are. That's terrific. Very nice presentation. It was so good to get to see you again. One thing I was thinking about when you talked about universal application, you could probably even strengthen that argument in your discussion of where we fall short. Laws are not applied equally by administrative agencies around the country. That's another place where I think rule of law is potentially under attack, but it may also be a nod to American federalism that rule of law should not mean the same thing in the same place, with some really strong exceptions, as you pointed out, perhaps in the justice system. I was curious in terms of problems you see with political corruption and inequitable application of laws in the justice system, whether you'd be willing to expand that to economic discrepancies, because then you become a fairly radical group that rule of law dictates a certain kind of economic distribution of wealth. Now, I don't know if you want to go that far or not. It would be tempting, but as you know, it would open up a can of worms that would be problematic. I hope you will go back and rethink how this system can work short of impeachment of judges of the Supreme Court if you think they're getting out of bounds. Remember that Congress controls 100% of the court's appellate jurisdiction. 100%. And Congress has been enlarging the Supreme Court's jurisdiction rather than calling it back. Now, historically, it's called it back, but there is a built-in Madisonian check that doesn't require the extraordinary device of impeachment that for some reason isn't working. So I want your help on why isn't it working? What is going on that we Americans in our elected bodies seem less likely to restrain the judiciary and the executive branch? I just go, huh? Now maybe that's why the rule of law index shows the United States on the decline. We ain't been going up. We're down in the 60s now. What is going on? I look to you to solve all these problems because you can do it. Thanks for a great presentation.
Great job, everybody. Thank you so much, California Wild. I'm going to stop the recording.